Welcome to the Legacy Intention video series, where we get to explore the word legacy and what it means for people as they are actually living from their legacy. And I have Claudius on with me today, and I'll have him introduce himself here in a second, but I just want to remind you to hit subscribe, hit the bell so you get updates on the next videos in the series, and please comment, like, and share, because that's a way if you want to ask Claudius a question or myself, and we'll get back to you with that answer pretty quickly. We can't say it'll be immediately, but within a couple of days as we see your question arrive. So with that, as all legacy intention videos that I do, I'm just going to have Claudius introduce himself with his full name and where he is and what he's up to, and then we're going to dive into looking at the word legacy. Claudius.
Dr. Stephen, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this topic of legacy. My full name is Claudius Peter van Wyk. So the Van Wyk piece is the Dutch heritage that went to Cape Town, before it was Cape Town, in 1686. And that's where I grew up, in South Africa. The last 10 years have been in Devon in England. The main reason for that was to be as close to Schumacher College as possible, where they do a lot of teaching in holistic science. In fact, the only place that really focuses on holistic science. And in the last year and a half has been up here in the Sierra Nevada mountains of Granada in Spain. And right now I can just see the outline of the Morocco, of the Atlas Mountains in Morocco across the Mediterranean. So it's a beautiful place to be. And so that's where I am and raring to look at the next chapter.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, for everyone, just let them know, I've got the view of the Rocky Mountains here in Canada, just so we're playing geography here at the moment.
Yes.
But Claudius, what is it that you are up to in terms of your work and your life at this point in time? And then we'll dig into legacy.
A major breakthrough for me, Dr. Stephen, was when I discovered neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, back in 1988. And my teacher, who was a senior lecturer in neurophysiology at Wits University in Johannesburg, he taught that. And he said something very, very important. He said, whatever you do, it always happens within an ecology. Whether you know it or not, you are functioning in some sort of an ecology and you're having an impact on an ecology. So that's a basic context. The frame that I'd been studying for a long, long time was holism, the holistic perspective and the holistic practice. How do you engage with dynamical whole systems? Are you going to engage with coherence? But the term legacy really dropped for me through meeting with Richard Barrett, who wrote that book on the evolution of the corporate soul. And he divided the stages of the evolution of an organization into 7 chapters. And the final chapter was legacy. So he said, for example, that you start off and the main focus is survival. You just look at the cash flows, etc. Then the next level is kinship. You're looking at who your stakeholder body is and how you look after them so they can look after you. And the next level after that is best practice, is how you can optimize your efficiencies by technology and latest practices. And he says all of that was the first order of awareness. It was an inward focus on the organization and organizational vitality. But then he said the next phase for certain organizations was where they went through a fundamental transformation. They really began to deeply re-interrogate their principles, their practices, their ethos, their values, their vision. And as they engaged in that deep interrogation, as they engaged with their workforce, with their people in the organization, what would emerge from that would be a sense of ownership of the vision, a sense of ownership of the organization, a sense of togetherness, a coherence, my word, at the organizational level. And then he said something really interesting happened from there, is that because it was functioning effectively within the organization, there was a desire, there was an intrinsic need to actually engage with the community, so that the organization was in a relationship with its business context or organizational context. They wanted to spread it out, to share it out. And so now it became more collaborative. It became more deeply systemic. But he said the final stage of awareness brings us to legacy, was when the organization was really starting to look at what is the long-term impact that it wants to have on society from a social perspective, from an ecological perspective, and from an enrichment of the human experience perspective. And so legacy thus applies not only to the organization, but almost in a way in the evolution of individual values. And so that is a first take. That's where I encountered legacy.
Yes, and I understand Barrett's work. I came through the world of holism and values and organization learning and all that. And I seem to have found myself more overlooking at legacy from the personal, the individual perspective, where you've just led us in terms of your own presentation. But I'd be curious, what does the word legacy, if you were to go to the Claudius dictionary, what would legacy mean?
So my great mentor was the author of Holism, Jan Smuts. And he said, when we look at wholeness, we were not just looking at a spatial factor. We were not just looking at the current time. When we looked at wholeness, dynamical wholeness, we were looking at the past and the present as it was impacting the future. We were thinking future. And so intrinsic to the deep holistic perspective is the very principle of legacy. And that then applies to the individual as well, who's reached that stage. So for many folks, leaving a legacy is to leave something for your children in the way of a financial legacy. But in my experience, for example, with my father, he left a completely different legacy. He left the role model that he played in my life as an exemplar, as a test for me of how I should play my own life going forward. And he made me aware that I would continue to live one way or another in the memory of those that I'd affected. I would have an impact one way or another in the legacy. And so the spirit of what I experienced and practiced and lived and spoke would have some sort of impact going forward into the future. And therefore, thinking about that longer term future would be practicing the holistic perspective, thinking about the gifts that my life actually give to society, both in terms of the human experience and in terms of the ecological, systemic nature of what enables us to exist in the first place, would be my spirit going forward. So I'm going to introduce the word here that the awareness of legacy is also a spiritual awareness, at the deepest sense of leaving something that remains in the hearts and minds of people that have been affected. And that's what it means for me.
Yes, you used a really great word, gift. And in the definition that I use of legacy, which is about the useful whats that you gift others so that they can learn something from your lived experience.
Yes.
And you're sharing a lot of, your own role models, and yet your own lived experience as you accumulate your lived experience, the gift that you're going to be, in a sense, living your gift and leaving your gift as you move forward. So it's very beautiful. You painted a very wonderful picture there for, I hope, the audience as they're listening in. Yeah. But in this notion of the holistic approach, the holism that you're that you're sharing with us. I'm not quite sure that everyone would probably understand who Holism is about, and your mentor, Smuts. All right. I always forget his first name. His first name was
Jan.
Jan Smuts, because I read his book as well during my own time. And I think it might be helpful if you could just give us a little bit of an overview of what holism is about, because you're leaning into it quite a bit here. So could you just share a little bit about what it is?
Yeah, I'd love to. So Jan Smuts grew up on a farm in the Cape. And in those days, the eldest son would go to school. The rest of the children didn't. But his elder brother died when he was 12 years old. So he went to school for the first time at the age of 12. But his education was home education by his mother, and it was educated by a Khoisan herdsman, because part of his task was to herd the animals. As a little boy, the chickens, then the goats, then the sheep, and eventually, when he was big enough, the cattle. And so he spent most of his time out in nature and being taught about nature at a very deep primal level by a Khoisan herdsman. And he had an epiphany. And that epiphany was that he felt a sense of dissolving of his ego into the environment, as though the rocks and the plants and the animals and the creatures were part of his being. It was a kind of a mystical experience. And yet what intrigued him was that he had a sense of identity, even though he was blending into this beautiful landscape. And that became his guiding light. What is that other quality of I that is transcendent of the physical limitations of his skin? What's that? And that I that is embracing of the whole living context, how does that I become present? How does that who I am do its work in the world? And so holism emerged out of that primal experience. Now, just very briefly, having gone to school at the age of 12 for the first time, he turned out to be a brilliant scholar and eventually was inaugurated as Chancellor of Cambridge University in 1947. In 1931, he became rector of St. Andrews University in Scotland. He was a brilliant academic, but always was the deep sense of the who I am is an instrument of the greater dynamical evolving context. So I use the evolving because holism, he said, was nature's drive to self-realization, and we human beings were an aspect of nature's wanting to know itself. Life's wanting to see itself through our eyes. And so holism is really a practice and a perspective that sees dynamical interrelatedness, that then sees that we have an impact, that we leave a legacy, that we are actually carrying forward the legacy of life itself. We are instruments in legacy's own unfolding. And I'm going to give you a very simple example. If you take lichen, you'll find that on branches of trees, you'll find that on rocks. It is a synthesis, I'm using the word very clearly, synthesis of two primal unicellular structures, prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Eukaryotes are able to draw the minerals from the rock. Prokaryotes are able to create photosynthesis by drawing energy from the sun. And prokaryotes and eukaryotes together form lichen, which is the oldest existing life form on planet Earth. That principle is called symbiosis. At the social level, it's called mutualism. We are supporting, we are collaborating, we are working together. So between mutualism and between symbiosis is another feature, it's called endosymbiosis. So in the oceans, you get mitochondria. And the mitochondria at one point were free floating organisms in the vast oceans. But eventually through the holistic creative principle, we absorb them we being all of life. And that mitochondria that used to be a free-floating element in the ocean now functions in our very cells. And it is very critical in the generation of energy release in our cells. So throughout creative evolution, disparate little entities have come together in increasing complex dynamical forms of symbiosis, endosymbiosis, collaborative, mutualism to create us as a human being. Where we got astray, and this is such an impact on legacy, where we got astray is we misinterpreted Darwin's notion of evolution. We misinterpreted the survival of the fittest as a mechanical thing. What it actually means, it's the survival and the thriving of the fittest relationships. All of existing living systems have been an expression of the fittest relationship because nothing is an island. And we misinterpreted that to be tough, to be successful, to compete, to beat the other fellow, to be the winner. There can only be one first past the post. We misinterpreted that. And in that misinterpretation, we lost the essence of what life is about. And we lost the essence of what human ethics is about. And holism is a perspective and practice that wants to remind us of the true nature of who we are. And I believe, that in being able to engage in that practice, we're leaving a genuine legacy, Stephen.
Yeah, and you are, because I know of the conversations we've had in the past and attending some of the presentations that you have of the fellows who are interacting with you around the Holist project. It's the Holist project, right? Did I get
That's
that
right?
Yeah,
That's
the
right.
Holist project, and I'll be putting a reference to that. But I think I'd like to pick up on, yes, legacy is this ecosystem story that you're sharing here. And it's something that I'm bringing into helping people understand their legacy. One of the things that I think is worth commenting on is most people think legacy, someone who's aged, lived experience, elder, and so on. But I think you're making a point here that there's a generational story, is that it's not just for those who are older, who we call out. There are those who are younger who are setting up their own legacy stories. We're seeing this very much in environmental ecological work that's unfolding. Is there anything you'd like to share about legacy across generations? Don't limit it just to, when you're older and elder. Anything you want to share there?
I want to share a movie. It's called Mr. Holland's Opus. The actor is
great movie.
Richard Dreyfuss.
Yeah.
And so that's beautiful, beautiful. Richard Dreyfuss in the movie wants to write his composition, The Symphony of America. But he thought that he'd have time to compose whilst he goes around the various smart hotels in the United States performing with a little classical group. So in the really smart hotels, classical music. But that unstable lifestyle doesn't enable him to do what he wanted to do. And so then he decides he's going to take up a teaching post. And that teaching post will hopefully see him busy in the mornings and give him the afternoons to compose his Symphony of America. But he finds that he also has to take on the brass band, and he has to take on the cheerleaders, and he has to take on extra classes. And so he just doesn't get to it. But where he can, he writes snippets. And one of his students start collecting those snippets. And eventually they come to a very dramatic phase in American history of education, where they've got cutbacks on the arts because of budgeting constraints. And Richard Dreyfuss finds himself having to take early retirement, and also the art teacher, because they have no more budget. And so there's a function to say farewell to him. And he is very, very reluctant to even go to the function. But his wife insists. And so when they go into this function, he's in open neck shirt. As he goes into this function, the assembly room is full of his students through the years. And up on the platform is an orchestra. And that orchestra is his students through the years. And one bright young lady has taken the snippets of his pieces that she captured and written the full score of the Symphony of America for him. And he invites him to come up and take the baton and conduct the symphony. The beauty there is that his life was the legacy, not the piece that he left in some kind of hard form. His life itself was the legacy. And now I'll come back to General Smuts, Jan Smuts, who was most impressed by the work of Goethe, Shakespeare, and Walt Whitman, the American poet. And what he said is, I came to see that in studying their lives, that their lives were far more significant than the actual work that they did, that the product that they did. It was where that product came from that was fundamentally more significant than a Mozart symphony or a Shakespeare play. Who is this being that was able to generate that? The being itself was the legacy. And so it seems to me that you are absolutely correct, that each one of us is creating a legacy by every interaction we have on every day. And so recently I did a wonderful walk from Lake Piruluco to Assisi, 120 kilometers with 12 people. And our leader, an Indian guru sort of a fellow, but deeply steeped in the ethos of St. Francis. So it was in the spirit of St. Francis. Wherever we went, he remembered the name of the person that served us, whether it was in the restaurant, whether it was in the lodgings that we had overnight. And he would then say, tell me your name. And they would say, why do you need to know? He says, I want to remember you for the service you've given me. And then they'd give their name. And then he would say, if you'd like, I'll say a prayer for you in the cathedral at Assisi. And they are so touched, Stephen. I saw people weeping. They remember him. He's created a moment of magic where he's seen them deeply and he's inquired into their being. And he's offered for them the highest blessing that he's able to offer. And they are touched and transformed in that. That to me symbolizes the poetry of leaving a legacy.
Yes. Well, the phrase that I'm using now is to live from the legacy you intend to share and leave, so that I can capture the essence of what you're talking about here. But as we, and unfortunately or fortunately for however we want to look at it, we're moving towards the close of our video here. And I know I would love to get you back again at some point in time. We can dive in a little bit more into some of these areas. But from a closing perspective, normally I give whoever I'm chatting with the end thoughts, but I'm just going to lead you just a little bit here, if you don't mind, Claudia. You used the phrase leaving an enduring legacy. You've been hinting at it, but let's close off by you sharing what you mean by an enduring legacy.
So the enduring legacy will be one that the spirit of the act, the spirit of the intention, the spirit of the word will impact on future generations. And so why I use the holistic frame is to actually have an idea of that evolutionary process. Let me just take one little step to the left and then I'll come back. In mind, looking at what actually enables deep success, I found three principles. The one principle is integrity of information. Am I operating in and from truth to the best of my ability? And in this post-truth era, that's a vexed question. And in this era where we are being digitally kept in little halls of mirrors, it's a real challenge. Am I living from and in the best truth that is possible? One. Two, I call that integrity of information. Second one is power of imagination. Am I visioning the kind of future that I would like to see and contributing to that vision? The power of imagination. And the next one is timing. Am I responding instinctively, intuitively to the dynamic moment, to that magical touch which Aristotle called the entelechy, the set of circumstances in which a potentiality can become an actuality. And so enduring legacy is operating from truth to the best of my ability, operating with an inspiring vision, inspiring to me to the best of my ability, and seeing every moment as full of potential power to actualize that through the acts, through the words and deeds and attitudes that I display. And what future will do with that, I cannot tell, but that's the intention that you are talking about.
And I think when we come back again another time, let's look at words like resilience, agility, creativity. I think we could have some fun because these make up this sort of holistic perspective of this ecosystem, which we can call legacy. And I think it'd be worth us exploring. So I'm just going to remind everyone to subscribe, ring the bell to get more videos and to get alerted to when Claudius is coming on again. Please comment, like, share, because I think if we can get a bit of interaction going here, we can extend this story of legacy, this holistic story of legacy that I think is so important. And Claudius has certainly emphasized that in his own way, in being for the world, with the planet, from the whole. So with that, everyone, take care, and we'll catch you again on another video in the Legacy Intention series. Thank you, Claudius.
Thank you.